Okay. Thanks very much. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Aoife Braiden. I'm the research manager with Geological Survey Ireland, and been helping Sarah and some of our colleagues with the geothermal programme. So some of you we've met before. For this session, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, maybe, of what we were talking about the last session. So, not to put a dampener on things, but maybe we're looking at some of the challenges that we have about implementing geothermal in Ireland and in the context that we were discussing earlier on. So Sarah introduced the technology and what it can do and how it can help solve some of our problems. A couple of people had mentioned that we're kind of the laggards in Europe at the moment, and that a lot of people are doing this already, and I'll show some examples. I would take from that maybe that the advantage of being a laggard is that lots of other people have learned from mistakes, have made the mistakes, and that we can learn from those. So it's maybe not always really bad. The technology has moved on a lot, the knowledge and how we learn about the subsurface. So I think from that we'll take the positives and say that we might be behind, but we can catch up pretty quickly if and when we want to. So yeah, as I mentioned, we'll look at some of the pitfalls, as Alan mentioned, some of the barriers, how we can and are already overcoming those in particular projects. But just before we get into that, I might just give a few examples of, I picked particularly university and hospital examples. These ones that I picked are, as Sarah mentioned, they're the kind of lower temperature systems and the similar geology that we have here, so we're not looking at your kind of Iceland or volcanic areas. So when we look at any of these systems, we're looking also at the heat demand and what we need to match. So this is on the left a heat demand map for Dublin, and on the right Northern Ireland. We don't have one for Belfast City at the moment, but that's in train. So it's pretty obvious when you look at it where the big heat draws are and how we can help address those. And then our job as geologists is trying to match that with the geological maps and see how can we help address these heat requirements. So just to give a quick recap, and for anybody who wasn't in the first session, the different types of geothermal energy. So there's these shallower systems that we were talking about earlier, with heating and cooling. You can also have heat storage subsurface. Then we have these kind of, what they're now calling in Europe, medium depth, which is kind of 1 to 2 kilometres, and looking at these hydrothermal systems, and as Tiernan was talking about. And then the deeper geothermal, which is your 3 to 5 kind of kilometres on this diagram, and how those, you can have multiple different systems servicing different types of users. So just to go into some of the examples, this is Boston University. So this is a single building use, and some of our panel can talk to this in a little bit about projects that they have underway for individual buildings. And this is a new centre for computing and data science on the campus. So it's an open loop system, 450 metres. They're taking quite low temperatures out, but it's enough to keep the building warm and then to cool it in summer. So they have 31 boreholes providing about a megawatt of heat. So this is looking at 19 stories, 345,000 square feet. Sorry, it's the American. But it can service most of their heating and cooling needs for that building. So these are the kind of systems that we're looking at if you're taking an individual building off the system. This is wider. This is a whole university. So it's a campus of nearly 21,500 students, what they consider to be a small city, so 4.6 kilometres squared. So, and they moved from a coal-fire system when they did the numbers, which, to be fair, is probably the worst that they were moving from. And based on their analysis, they said, okay, geothermal will work for us, that's for us. So they're saving anywhere between $2.5 million annually just by switching to a geothermal system. Now again, that's off coal, so it's probably the worst, but just shows you the kind of emissions reductions and savings, financial savings that you can get. Interestingly, when they were talking about this project, they talked about some of the challenges, and that one of the biggest challenges was seeking funding from the state. And that's one thing that we've been kind of highlighting, and across Europe there's various different types of financial risk schemes and insurance schemes, and how to get these kind of projects funded, particularly in a kind of an untested environment. So they went at it from the point of view looking at the system capacity, conditions, and then the environmental implications, and used those as a way of convincing people with the money that this is the way to go. Also, then they had a bit of an issue around trying to convince people that it was worth the physical disruption, even if it's temporary. So, you know, putting in your boreholes and digging up ground, you can make it look beautiful afterwards, but for the time that you are working on the system, it can be a bit unsightly maybe. But it's the same as any construction project. This is Technical University of Delft. So these guys have an in-house research group that are heavily involved in this project and pushing this project forward. So this is, again, city campus, 27,000 students. They're looking at open loop deep systems, 2.3 kilometres. And they're extracting that at 75 degrees and re-injecting it at 50. So that's delivering them 8 megawatts of heat for the whole campus. Does this have a pointer? So that there, park kind of thing, is that there. So if you turn the picture 90 degrees, so you can just see the campus and what they're planning. So the red pipe is coming from the ground there, is bringing up hot water into the system on the surface, and then the cold pipe bringing it back down again, and it's being reheated. The distance between those two at the bottom is about 1.5 kilometres apart at the bottom. So this is where the pipe goes down and then deviates that way. Cold water goes into the system, is heated up through the system and comes back out. So the surface, there isn't much to see. As Rick was saying, sometimes the downside of bringing people to a site is that there is not a whole lot to see when you get that far. So the surface pipe is only 50 centimetres diameter. That's the kind of the surface expression, plus then whatever plant that you have. In this case, they have the added value of using it as a research site. So they have geologists, engineers, data people, modelers, all working on this. So it's an active lab as well as everything else. So you have that extra added value. And they're also looking at neighbours using it for new neighbouring developments that are going in the city. If that's the case, then the output will ramp up to 15 megawatts with a return temperature of 30 degrees. So they'll just take that extra bit out before it's re-injected. This is some examples of hospitals in Sweden. Again, you don't think of Sweden as a very geologically hot country. In this case, they have a mix. The Norrland University Hospital has a mix of technologies, so geothermal can become part of that mix. It doesn't have to be the one solution for everything. So they have various cooling pumps, chillers, they have solar panels as well for some of their electric needs. So they have their campus, their space is 345,000 square metres, and they have 2 geothermal energy plants on a grid where the whole lot is interconnected and integrated. They also use the subsurface for storing heat and then cooling. And they've worked out that they're saving on average about 600 tonnes per year CO2 in emissions, about €500,000 in savings at the moment, and their payback period is 9 years for the system that they've put in. So they have an array of shallow 200-metre wells. So again, Sarah was mentioning about the options in terms of the deep versus shallow. The reason they have 2 systems, by the way, is they added a second one. So just to show that you can expand the systems and you can add on buildings or add to your network as you go. It doesn't all have to be done in one go. And that's supplying, so those 2 plants are supplying over 95% of the cooling demand and a third of the heating demand for the whole university hospital. And then the other example from Sweden is a system where they switched from having old oil boilers and electric chillers in the hospital to a geothermal system. So that was in 1995. So again, we are lagging behind in terms of using this technology, but just to give an example of people that have loads of experience and knowledge in this space. So they're using an aquifer system where they have cold wells down to 100 metres. And that's delivering almost half of their heating demand. So even if you don't have to put your whole system, half of heating demand when you have a hospital that has such high heating demands is still a significant reduction. This is a Southampton district heating scheme. So this is, we'll ask John a little bit about this in a minute in terms of district heating and how that works and how that can be integrated. So this is a system that started in the 1980s, and they originally were told, no, that's not the way to go. And they said, no, we're going to do this anyway. So they now have heating that they top up with some gas-fired boilers to add to the system because they've expanded the network. But they have 14 kilometres of district heating network now, and it saves 12,000 tonnes of CO2 annually. And they're just some of the numbers. So they've gone now to 3.4 kilometres. That diagram on the right is not to scale. That borehole is actually 3.4 kilometres. So they're taking up quite hot water on their side, and from that you can generate electricity as well. So they're using for a bit of electricity and also heat. So they're taking it out at 80 degrees with a return of about 50. And as you can see at the bottom there, that is used for multiple users on the system. So this is going a little bit away from what we were talking about earlier of having just one user. That's quite simple. This is where it's getting a little more complex, and you have several users on the system. So, but in that case, you have a university and a hospital, civic centres, residential buildings, private sector, all that. And the same with this. So this is a new one that's going in just east of Paris. So the plan is to have this working up and running by 2025. So Paris has been using geothermal and district heating since the 1970s, so they are well ahead. This project in particular is going to service 7,500 households, a shopping centre, a hospital, town hall, swimming pool, and a new condominium, a new apartment building. So, and they're going to 1,500 metres. Now, in Paris, they have slightly higher temperatures in that geology, but they're targeting 61 degrees Celsius. So, you know, this isn't, like I said, this isn't something that requires a volcano under your feet. They're also looking at expanding that in the future to service the next town beside them, which will add another 8,000 households. And again, I pulled out something there that they just, you know, when we're talking about the challenges, one of the reasons that they looked at this was because it was going to limit the nuisance linked to comings and goings of trucks who supply energy to the system. So whether that's biomass, oil, you know, if you're not on a gas or network that's serving you with your fuel, you have to bring it in, and that's one of the things that we'll maybe discuss a little bit in the context of a city centre project. And this is another one that had it was a joint solution, so a joint project developed by a collaboration, which is what a lot of this requires. So just some numbers to finish up really. This is just to show the growth in the geothermal capacity. So on the left-hand side is electricity and the right-hand side is heat. And this gives you an idea of the growth from 1995 to 2020. So this is picking up. It means that we're expanding the knowledge, we're expanding the skill set, we're expanding the number of people and companies in this space, widening competition, all these good things. And then for our discussion, maybe just to talk a little bit, you don't need to worry about the details on this, but this is just to show you how you arrive at the decision when you start getting into the kind of engineering end of it. So the key considerations of what you need, your geology, but also on the engineering solutions and financial solutions. And then on top of that, you have the non-technical solutions that we've talked about. So that can be things like access, social acceptance, you know, whether your neighbours approve, geological risk and the data that will get you to this decision, financial risks and support, who provide those and who will kind of help those to get the sector up and running. And then if there's potential added value, for example, in the university example, neighbouring heat demand, there's several things you could add there on the kind of policy and social and environmental side that need to be considered. So these end up being quite complex projects that require multiple types of expertise and collaborations. So I think that's all I have there. I'll circulate these slides as well if you want, and Sarah has some of that information up online. But in the meantime, I think we'll get started on the panel. So we have Kyle Wiley, who's an engineer with 20 years experience across different industries. He's an engineering team in St James's Hospital and is responsible for the safe delivery, maintenance and operating utilities and services for patient care. And has recently delivered the largest EPC in Irish healthcare and exploring how to make progress further to net zero targets. So we have Dr. Louise Glennis from University of Galway, chartered architect trained in Seville in Spain and Venice in Italy. Has worked in the private sector and industry with a PhD focus on energy efficient systems in large spaces and things like airports and interesting buildings. And has been responsible for construction management of several complex projects, including one that we'll talk a bit about today, which is the Geothermal project on campus in Galway that Tiernan mentioned earlier on. So we have John O'Shea, who's with Codema. So company we were mentioned earlier on is the Dublin Energy Agency. And John is working on quite a diverse team and do a lot of modelling and looking at the numbers for energy across the city, working closely with the likes of Dublin City Council, and he'll talk a little bit about the district heating systems that we have. We have Mark Geraghty, who is the Environmental and Sustainability Manager with Technical University of Dublin. And a large part of his role is to try and achieve the mandated targets that we have and that they have for 2030 and 2050 set out in the Climate Action Plan. So we mentioned briefly earlier the Grange Warming project on TU Dublin campus. So Mark is helping lead on that, and we've been doing some interesting work on campus and with their working on their borehole and like. So we haven't worked on geothermal. So let's see. We have Victoria, who is Division and Estates Manager working with Belfast Trust, and she's responsible for the Energy and Environment section. She's a mechanical engineer with experience in borehole well technology, mostly for potable water. And so they have been looking at a new project around geothermal and the potential use for geothermal in the hospital sector. And then Stuart Dunn, who's the Director of Estates and Facilities for the Mater University Hospital. Chartered engineer with 20 years experience across healthcare, electrical engineering and energy management, with particular focus on carbon reduction and sustainability. So quite a mix on the couch today. So I think, and by the way, I should say, if anybody has any questions, I'll come back and start with a few questions for the group, and then we'll come back in a little bit and follow up with some questions from the audience. So maybe Mark, if I start with you on the university side, if you could talk a little bit about the project that you've been doing in Grange Warming, given that we've looked at how geothermal can help address our needs in general, but when we get down to the kind of nuts and bolts of it, what are you guys trying to do on Grange Warming campus, and what are the kind of difficulties that you've hit so far?
Well, I suppose we started this about 2.5 years ago, I think, at this stage. It seems like shorter, but I think it's been that long. Before our new targets came out with the Climate Action Plan, we knew new targets would come. We knew they were going to be very ambitious. And we were starting to look at how we could start to decarbonise, in particular, our heat across the campus, looking at the electrical systems to upgrade, not something we can affect, but what we can affect locally with our thermal load. We looked at different technologies. We looked at air source heat pumps, we looked at biofuels, and for different reasons we decided not to go to biofuels. You just mentioned one of the other sites that if we were to try and use biofuels on site, it's the security supply. It's also a heavily built up urban environment. We could have 2-3 trucks a day delivering wood pellets to try and heat a university, which just wasn't going to be feasible. Our land area, while we're not overdeveloped right now, our master plan is for a large number of more buildings that might change given our new targets. Our land area didn't give us any options on a large scale solar or any of those kind of remedies. So we looked at geothermal in particular because of its footprint. As we discussed earlier today and just now, it's not new, it's not rocket surgery, as Joy Bush would have said. It's something that has been done, and it's not something that we should be veering away from. I think the shallow geothermal may have got itself a bit of a bad name back in the 2000s. There were a few instances where it didn't work out, but again, as we said earlier as well, it's about awareness and advertising the positives on the shallow, and also to look at this deep bore idea, and the deep bore, and of course with GSI's help with their test on site, gave us the opportunity to see what we did have under our feet, and finding that temperature was very, very encouraging, and it has led us to continue on with GSI, Codina, Dublin City Council, to keep going on that particular project and try to get to a stage where we might be that demonstrator exemplar project in an urban environment in Ireland for the first time. And because of the encouragement we got from that, we're going to move on to Tala as well, where we also have our second campus and Blanchardstown as well. we're going to start with one, but we'll keep going. So we're looking at telling for another test hole this year, hopefully next couple of weeks, to see what we have. But back to Grange Gorman, we do see it as a potential for ourselves, for the neighbourhood, for the housing around us. The fact of the matter is looking at it as well. It's all starting to join the dots that we have this multimodal district heating system that could affect not only ourselves, but our neighbours and the wider environment around Dublin South.
Great, thanks. Just as a matter of interest, what's your current kind of peak demand? What are you aiming towards with your kind of expansion in the next phase?
We're looking, well, the built out development is about 30 megawatts of heat. I don't see us, I can't see us pursuing that to that extent. I would hope that we're going to pare back. We're looking at our utilisation of space at the moment. We're looking at what way we use our space. And do we have enough capacity right now? Do we need to keep building? It's just a natural development within any organisation to keep growing. But there are times when you have to say, right, do we really need to grow so much? The site itself is about 4 megawatts now. I don't see us going to that 30 megawatt load. It just doesn't seem feasible.
Okay, thanks. I might maybe back into some of the details on that. But maybe, Louise, you could tell us a little bit about the Geothermal project in Galway campus and what you've done with that.
So the Geothermal project is, so I'm just going to, I think Chairman had explained in the previous session the details of the project, so I'm just going to read a bit of the things. So it's a shallow ground source heat pump project. It's a mid-sized project. It's not as big as you expect with the geothermal. So it's firstly an European project. So it's a Horizon 2020 project. So there's a consortium of universities, technology experts, key turnkey engineering consultants and labs. Project is aimed at testing different technologies on the ground source heat pump systems, and so there are 5 pilots in the project, 2 in Ireland, 1 in the island of Finishmore, and the big one, the most ambitious, let's say, is the project that we just completed at the formerly NUIG, the University of Galway. That's a shallow ground source heat pump project. The idea was to heat the swimming pool. We started with looking at the heat profile, heat demand profile. So we worked backwards and established what was the most kind of efficient layout for the heat extraction test. And then we came up with a number of innovations on the system, and propose the feasibility numbers and to the project management team, and took us a bit of a time to get the project ongoing and funded. Okay, and finally we got the bravery that was explained in the previous session. It was talking about the leadership and the bravery that it takes to take the risk. There's a lot of risk with this, and it wasn't really a project that was attractive for the members of the management board of the university. But finally, we had to build the business case, and with the help of the new director of real estate, and etc., we made the numbers, and for the university it was really clear it was a very interesting investment, because the university sees that as a demonstrator. So now we are in the process of making all of the awareness, making it as a leading laboratory concept, extracting the data, exposing the data to the research community. We have a number of interesting things going on the monitoring of the system and the operation of the system. So we will look at the ground temperatures on the whole extraction field, on the depth of the field. As we have some innovations there installed down the hole. So and as you know, these are publicly funded projects, so we have an obligation for open research and open data. So we are now in the process of kind of advertising the living laboratory publicly and attracting researchers that want to test innovations using this pilot at the University of Cork. So we are kind of open for business in that regard. Okay?
Great. And one of the things that we've been talking a little bit about amongst ourselves as well is the complexity of some of these projects. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what that was like in working with the university. Is it something new and innovative is always a difficulty when you bring it to the board, but in terms of the team that you needed to pull together for this project, what were the kind of lessons from that?
Yeah, well, the project is complex in the way that we are in this European project, but I think there's a bit of an experience here with other universities. It's something that sooner or later it comes with in a university environment. Like there are European projects that come with a bit of funding, and they look at energy efficient buildings or retrofits or building envelope or smart grid or anything like that. They use pilots, and pilots are usually some part of the building that has, some part of the campus that has potential or needs an improvement. When you bring that expertise, and that expertise is usually from around Europe, so we have companies coming from the Netherlands with a lot of expertise, with experts from Sweden. Sweden has been a kind of a beacon, especially for its pilot on the way they allow in the planning system to operate, streamline the planning permission system, the way the drillers are certified, and the way all of the companies work together with the municipalities to enable to facilitate the project instead of bottlenecking the project like that. So also for the Survey of Ireland, there's an information system on that. Countries like Denmark, Sweden, they have a lot of information available for the public that it was also a good enabler for the project. So when you start thinking about these kind of innovations and you approach the first setup of the project and the first kind of layout, then you from the design to the procurements to the construction, it's been challenging because you see that there's frictions in the system where you want to do certain things, you want to use certain type of technology or consultants, but then you're given the instruments that you have. Like you have a certain procurement system, you have to appoint certain consultants in a certain way, and we've seen a lot of room for improvement in the whole process, including planning and mostly procurement. But finally, we went through. I mean, with the tools and the resources that we were given, we went through the system. I mean, we went through the whole process, and we managed to finish. But if you don't discover areas for improvement, I think you're not really risking enough to get that friction going into the usual practices. So this is mostly what happened, and by looking at the situation on the mother hospitals and the timelines, etc., it's a similar situation. We are a bit better off. Like we managed to get the university management team on board once we had kind of a feasibility plan or business case built that address the needs of the university on the sustainability strategy plan, etc., and all the kind of numbers on the CO2 reduction, phase out, and the value for recruiting certain students. Once we had that, and we had the university management team on board and the funding on board, and they saw the value of that, it's been nearly 1 year and a half to completion, using procurements without any bringing any specialized engineering company from the Netherlands or anything like that. Local companies, local expertise, and a lot of collaboration and a lot of stubbornness on site.
I was just going to say, that's
Okay.
very diplomatic. Yeah. No, I think it's important actually to highlight those frustrations in the system so that we can help get around them or over them or break them down or what that is, if that's what it's going to take to get these kind of projects up and running. I think maybe Victoria, you could talk a little bit about what's happening in Northern Ireland and from Belfast Trust side.
Yeah, so I suppose to give a bit of context, Belfast Trust is one of the largest health and social care trusts within the UK. We provide services for around 340,000 people in Belfast and obviously regional specialties. We have 4 major acute hospitals and a budget of about 1.3 billion. But to give a bit of context in terms of energy use, so as a trust last year we spent approximately 44 million on gas and electricity, which equates in terms of gas consumption around 200,000 megawatt hours in terms of gas, and electricity at around the 80,000 mark. So I suppose working on those figures, we need to do something with the targets that are coming over the hill at us. So I suppose on the city hospital side, we had initially looked at the thermal load on site and what we could do. We have one building, which is our mental health building. This building is fairly new stock, and at the minute has a standalone gas boiler on site. So naturally we would have tried to bring that back into the bigger heat network, but it's actually presented us with a bit of an opportunity to maybe look at something different and do something different. So to date we have carried out feasibility for this site in terms of a geothermal solution. The proposal is for a pair of wells, so an abstractor and injector, and the thought process is that those will provide us about 900 kilowatts of heat and about 450 kilowatts of cooling capacity. With those figures and the building that we have in mind, that will totally decarbonise the thermal load within that building. So I suppose in terms of trying to get a model and a pilot for what we're trying to do, this is the basis. And I suppose we talked about it earlier in terms of somebody has to go first and everybody's standing in the wings watching very carefully.
Well, salute your bravery, Victoria. Just on that, you mentioned feasibility study. Mark, you got some studies done in Grange Gorman as well, right? So, I mean, how were they useful to you? What kind of studies were they? How were they useful, and how did that help progress that project internally? What boards to answer to?
We've done, as part of the Peace Plus application that we're doing the Gemini group with Codina, ourselves, GSNI, GSI, etc. We've looked at a deep and a shallow design across the site. We're not decided yet, so we have to look at some further studies. But I think the studies gave us the opportunity to kind of focus on what the overall cost is going to be, what the return is going to be. As it was talked about earlier, it's about 14 million build out for the demonstrator. They gave us that kind of groundwork, but before that we have to look at subsurface. So we tendered for a seismic design, which was carried out last year. So that seismic design would be covering us and general area around Dublin changes to matter, etc. And again, just on the point that was made earlier on, it's about risk and whether we're going to be risk aware or risk averse. Risk aware is good, risk averse is bad, but with that study, we can make a more educated decision on whether we're going to go deep or if we're going to go shallow. And again, it doesn't only de-risk TV Dublin, it'll de-risk every public sector organisation really, and gives us a very good snapshot of what we have. I think you talked about Paris earlier on. They've got slightly better at lower depths. But in Paris, you're looking at 250,000 houses are being fed from geo systems across the city. We don't know enough about Dublin and the geology to know exactly what we can get. But this is our first step. And I think that the seismic study, which has been supported by all the hospitals, and the application for funding has gone to the Department of Environment, that would be our key want at this stage. Our feasibilities on our deep and shallow are great, but we need to have that raw data to de-risking and get ourselves in.
Maybe just to explain a little bit on the seismic survey that I mentioned and Alan mentioned earlier. So this is part of what Sarah was talking about in terms of the data gathering exercise, and from our side, from the geological survey, it's one of the layers of data that we would use to figure out what is subsurface. So, for example, if you are building a wind farm, you can go and measure the wind in that place for a year and get your average resource, what you're likely to get back in terms of energy. If you put a wind farm there, you can do all the calculations, same as solar. That's trickier when it comes to geothermal, because we need to figure out what resource we have beneath the surface, and to do that we need to figure out what it looks like. Does it have the right type of rocks? So the heat is there, you know that it's, it then becomes a question of what kind of rocks are there and how easy is it to get any heat out. Are you using an open system or a closed loop system? And all of those figures, and as Sarah mentioned, a lot of those are used for the calculations. So when you start the calculations, you end up with this quite wide range of figures. The idea is to really narrow that down, and to do that we need to know a little bit more about our subsurface. So seismic survey is one of those where it's collecting images beneath the surface of what's down there, what it looks like. So it's long been used in various different types of geological studies, and as we mentioned, countries that have had an onshore oil and gas background tend to have a lot of that kind of data. So we're catching up a little bit there too. So it's one of the data sets that Sarah and her team will be pulling together soon, hopefully. Okay, so maybe we go to the hospitals then. On both ends of our panel here, where we have Kyle and Stuart. If you could talk a little bit maybe about, I know Alan filled us in a little bit on the matter already, but a little bit about the kind of heat demand maybe in your side, Kyle, and the challenges of that kind of city centre, working in kind of an urban environment.
So St James Hospital, I suppose, is the largest teaching hospital in the country, and spread over 40 acres, and we have, I think we have probably the largest heat profile or heat demand in the health sector for a single organisation. So there's big challenges there, where we have the National Burn Centre in the hospital as well too, and I suppose just to give a bit of context, and how the heat profile for the country works, for the hospital works, is heating seasons and cooling seasons don't apply to the hospital, so the burn centre, for example, one of the biggest risks to a burns patients when they come in is hypothermia, believe it or not. So we have to be able to operate our theatres at 40 degrees Celsius. So in the depths of winter we have a massive constant heat demand in the hospital. Likewise in the winter time, there's a cooling demand there as well too. We've MRIs with a large diagnostic department, so there's a massive cooling base load there as well too. So this whole conversation around heating and cooling and opportunity and potential there is really exciting to us. I suppose the site, as I said, is 40 acres. There's parts of the hospital are dated back to the 1880s, 1890s. There's parts that date back to the middle of COVID. So we've quite a large age profile there as well. It's quite dense, quite sprawled. There's not much free space. So the shallow option, I suppose, is something that we're exploring as well too. The one that's really exciting to me though is the district scheme, and how we can integrate that into our existing systems. We have our own internal mini district heating scheme in the hospital. We have the pipe work running through the middle of the hospital. We have the plant rooms, we have the heat exchangers, we have it all there. If I just had a pipe of hot water running past the hospital, more than happy to tap into it, you know. So that's, but I think for us, because it's not just that one site, we have several locations there around the hospital, around the city as well too. The one for us then is integrating, you know, the shallow options, integrating the district scheme, you know, how can we use these options to decarbonise and move away from the gas and the boilers. And just to, I suppose, finish off, to give a bit of context, we're talking about, I know you're saying it's been around for a while in Europe, but for us it's innovative technology. The boilers we took out last year were originally designed to burn turf. That's what we were burning in the hospital. So to talk about coal, we were actually burning turf. And the hoppers are still there, where there was 4 lorries a day, pulled up, dumped the turf out and burned away. So we've come a long way since then, but we've got a long way to go, and I think this is the, you know, one of the options that is the most exciting for us anyway.
Morning, afternoon, at this point. Yeah, just to add to what Kyle has said, Dr. Blake had mentioned she has a dream. We have an ambition, but we also have an obligation. And with the public sector, obviously we're the 50% target and the 51% target from the greenhouse gas emissions. I apologise for the gigawatts and the kilowatts and the tonnage that we're going to talk about. But in relation purely to the carbon, because there's a lot of focus on directly into the carbon. And for the Mater Hospital, with their gap to target, we have 5,770 tonnes to offset between now and 2030. That, in my opinion, won't be possible unless we get some renewable energy sources within the campus to kind of offset that. Looking at the numbers, back to the presentation, Aoife, that you presented here, and taking Sweden as an example of a 360,000 square metre estate at 600 tonne savings. We're 180,000 square metres of estate. And if we apply that logic, if we had that output, flow, return, temperatures from a geothermal perspective, we could be looking at nearly 50% of our carbon reduction through a geothermal project, which I think is exceptional. But it's not going to deliver all of the tonnage that we need to save, and it's going to be a mix across the hospital, across numerous renewables, different technologies, some new, some old, some innovative. And I think with the heat demands that we have across our space heating, our domestic hot water, we're into the megawatts, the gigawatts from the total final energy consumption across the hospital. We're one hospital of many. I think there's over 3,500 gigawatts from the HSE's perspective across all of the estates, across 4,500 buildings. So it's a collective approach. There's a number of people on the panel today, and there's a lot of ambition here to deliver it with regards to geothermal, whether it's shallow, deep, we don't know yet. We met Mark and his team at TUD about a year ago with the teams, and we've kind of built on that ourselves to the point where we were in feasibility ourselves about shallow and deep, and the output from that, and with the seismic acquisition in some way across the north of the city, I think will give some really good empirical data sets for us as a hospital, and also for other businesses and industries across the city network. And that should pepper and give government, give policy, maybe give that kind of reason around what we're trying to do. But we have 6 years, we don't have a lot of time to remove that 5,770 tonnes of carbon. I was at the Energy Ireland conference last week, and what I got from that conference, and Dr. Blake had touched on, was 92% dependency on fossil fuels nationally, which are bottom of the table. So we need to get the average is 22%, and maybe this technology with the ambition and demand from everybody here, and we can offset immediately with 50% of our hospital targets through geothermal.
Yeah, I think you had a good point there. This is going to be part of the solution. You know, the likelihood is that this will be in the mix, and we still will have the electricity needs and the other energy targets, but it's going to be part of a mix of renewable energies. I think for any of the big users. But you mentioned networks there, and maybe John, I can come to you about district heating networks, and you can tell us a little bit about how they work, how Kadima and working with DCC and others on the Dublin networks and what that looks like, and back to Kyle's point of if a pipe is passing his door, you can. So how does that work? People don't want to think about it.
Yeah, I suppose to give people a bit of background in district heating, I suppose I think the easiest way to think about it is think about it as if it's heating system in your house. It's just a pipe network that has a centralised heat source that pumps out hot water. And kind of essentially in your house that hot water is sent to radiators, but if you think of a district heating network, each radiator is a building essentially. So it's just a larger version of that. I suppose what you have essentially is kind of a super insulated pipe network that's buried in the ground. So as I said, it's kind of hot water, like it's a technology agnostic piece of infrastructure, so you can heat it, with whatever is available to you, whatever indigenous source or renewable source you have available. And yeah, essentially this hot water is pumped to each building, it gives up its heat to that building, and then the cooler water comes back to the energy centre to be reheated again. I suppose generally these kind of networks start as kind of smaller schemes that might have a single heat source, but generally spread across cities, and incorporate more and more heat sources as they go, which provides extra resilience because you're not relying on one heat source, and as I said, allows you to use whatever is available to you in that area. I suppose I guess similar to what people were saying about geothermal, it's not a new technology. There are 10,000 heat networks across Europe that are being used and have been used for decades. We've got cities like Copenhagen and Stockholm where over 90% of all our heat demand is supplied through district heating. And that's, Stockholm is particularly impressive considering it's made up of islands, so to connect it with a pipe network is an impressive feat. So, I guess what we've kind of seen looking at countries like that is that, if you increase the proportion of heat you're supplying through heat networks, it makes it easier to adopt renewables and low carbon heating. So there's a direct kind of correlation between the adoption of district heating and the ability to incorporate renewables and change between sources as well. Kind of, I guess similar to what we're seeing in the electricity grid, we're able to kind of make more progress on the electricity side because we're changing these generators that aren't in people's homes. So you're doing that without disrupting what's going on in people's homes or having them to make decisions on what's going on in their homes. So that's kind of allowed us to, I guess, accelerate in that sector faster than the heat sector, where obviously we're pretty far behind a lot of countries in Europe. So I guess district heating now is that, I suppose it is a sort of we see it sort of as a key piece of infrastructure, and it's not really a technology, it's a piece of infrastructure. So as I said, you can use multiple heat sources. I suppose the benefits of that as well from, if we're talking about, air source heat pumps as an alternative, I guess you can kind of reduce the impact on the electricity grid by having heat networks rather than putting everything through all the wires in the electricity grid. And I suppose when we're talking about, deep geothermal in particular, you're thinking kind of higher temperatures, higher efficiency, lower impact on the grid. If you've got a deep geothermal system, you're reducing the impact on the electricity grid by 90%. So I guess there's a lot of opportunities there, and I suppose we've kind of done some initial analysis in Dublin on what the potential is for deep geothermal with help from Sarah in GSI as well. And we found now it's all within a range, which obviously we'll be able to narrow in on when we've got more data available. But we're looking at potential of heating up to 300,000 homes, with deep geothermal in County Dublin. So there's significant opportunity there for us.
And just to say, there's already some pipes in the ground, so there's, there's some projects already underway, and also some policy and regulation, or there's some work happening at the government level, right?
Yeah. So we have our kind of first large-scale district heating network developed in Tala, which is taking waste heat from a data centre in Tala and putting through heat pumps to increase its temperature, and it's supplying the TUT campus in Tala as one of the first buildings to connect. So yeah, we have our kind of first large scale network now, and I suppose there's a district heating steering group as well that's been chaired by the department, who are basically looking at the kind of policy and regulatory elements that need to change to facilitate greater adoption. So we've have already started to remove some of those kind of revisions to building regulations and stuff like that to fully consider district heating as an option and kind of the benefits of it. I guess there's a lot of progress being made, but I guess we've great work to do as well in terms of clear funding mechanisms and guidance on business models that suit different type of customers and stuff like that. But we're definitely making good progress, and we now have a target in the climate action plan as well for 2.7 terawatt hours of district heating by 2030. So I guess that represents 10% of the residential and commercial heat demand in the country. So it's a significant target considering we're at less than 1% at the moment. So there's definitely support there at a government level. So it's I guess it's the challenge of scaling now. We've kind of started. We started a few networks, but we need to kind of build that capacity as we go and try as much as we can make it, indigenous capacity as well. So initially, obviously, we're going to take experience from other countries that have done it, but we need to build our own capacity. If only for the reason that everyone is expanding their district heating networks now with the fuel crisis. We see reports from Denmark where 90% of district heating customers have the same or lower price last year than they did the year before, and so that's following the Ukraine invasion of Ukraine and everything like that. So, and the reason for it is that they're using what's available to them. They're using the indigenous heat sources that they have, be it geothermal or biomass or waste heat or whatever. So, there's an opportunity there for us to help protect people from these kind of volatile price shifts as well.
Yeah, I think interestingly, in Norway, for example, they were largely, had a lot of electrified heat and are making a decision. They sell us their oil and gas, but then they use hydro to generate electrical heat. But they're moving from that to geothermal, even though it's particularly difficult in much of Norway given their geology, because they can see that electricity is going to be needed for example, transport and other demands on the grid. It's not going to be able to cope with everything. So it's interesting to see that some people are even moving away from electrified heat at scale. But on the question of scaling, maybe Louise, you could talk a little bit about your experience from the GeoFit project. Are there plans to expand beyond the swimming pool that was huge in that, but are there plans to do more, or are we looking at more options to add buildings? Or?
Just to explain a bit, I'm not aware of the overall university plans for district heating. There is always the intention of doing it, and it was also the intention on the construction of the actual building. So the engineering building had kind of a back building. It's called the Energy Center, which is kind of a big tent room where we would supply heat to the North Campus cluster, let's say. So these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 buildings. So there is already a mini district heating network from the back of that building, 300 meters to the swimming pool. So alongside that line, there are 3 or 4 buildings that could benefit, and then there is another more coming in the pipeline, which is the small buildings, sports or rowing and kayaking center at the edge of the river, kayaking center, things like that. So that we are tapping into that pipeline. So that was never released. One thing to highlight when you're talking about district heating networks, that you have to be prepared for not to, you know, like there's usually bill for electricity and gas. You have to prepare your market targets, like the consumers that you are gonna end up billing them for it. So this is something that you need to prepare. So if you don't understand that, like if we have tenants and if you rent offices, you have to bill for heat and to construct a price for heat, because they always see the business models are only priced for the electricity bill or the gas bill. That's why clearly you have to build the price and construct the price and a pricing scheme for heating. We're not prepared for that.
Yeah.
So we have to think about that, and we have to think how to report that also.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the question earlier, who owns the heat, and then also how do you set that pricing regulation, and presumably at some point, so if your discussions with the COE, I'll just give them a job there. Just before we go on, does anybody have any questions?
Thank you all. That's really interesting. And Neil Alford from HM Architects, probably going to embarrass myself with my question, but and I suppose a lot of it is to do with the scaling up and what Lewis just talked about in terms of getting the market ready. But am I right in thinking that one of the advantages will be you don't have to do too much to plug homes into a district heating system, so that you're not having to change radiators, emitters and things, and presumably similar for hospitals where you're not having to do a huge amount of work to change all of the systems within homes, for example. So if in my house it's a gas boiler, it's actually quite simple to plug in a district heating system. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, no, definitely is. So yeah, I guess so to take the Tala network as an example, so the network there supplies the hot water at between 70 and 85 degrees, so it's what we call a weather compensated system, so the temperature increases as it gets colder outside. And I suppose that's very similar to what the boilers would have provided, for the previous years. So as a result of that, you don't have to change radiators or anything like that. Essentially, you take out your boiler and you put in a heat exchanger, which is a small little unit with a heat exchanger and some pumps on it. So it's kind of a plug and play kind of replacement for your boiler, essentially. And yeah, as you said, that kind of, I suppose, first of all, you don't have to replace your radiators, but also the requirement for kind of deep retrofitting buildings and stuff like that is also avoided in the immediate term. I mean, obviously, you try and encourage that as time goes by, so that the system itself, its efficiency will also improve as buildings are retrofitted. But I suppose you can get that kind of whack of carbon saving right up front without, all this kind of additional work. And it's pretty fast, so there's less disruption to people own the buildings. You're not moving out for weeks or months. It's a couple of days, maybe. Depending on the size of the building, could be a bit longer, but it's relatively quick work. It's taking your boiler out, putting in a heat exchanger, and I guess the big piece of work is laying the pipe in the street.
But one second,
I should say, by the way, there's no lady questions here because we're used to talking to ourselves, so we always have to know what questions people have. So thank you.
Just Peter Smith from HSC, to speak to that issue with Chris. Excuse me. We've been progressing a Pathfinder project Vincent Daniel mentioned earlier on, and one of our learnings that's emerging from it is that there's a sensible element of fabric upgrade. Right, that it makes sense to do to reduce your thermal load, and then that means that there's a reduced load, obviously, to be fed from whether it's district heating or heat pumps or whatever else. The other, just a point on the district heating, I think what we're learning as well is that we consider that through the Pathfinders, and one of the issues really is a lack of certainty in relation to what the schemes are and when they're going to be available. So I think that's really it's maybe a question maybe for John around about a time to be set for publishing what the scheme looks like. But to go back to Kyle's point I think earlier on, we, the HC, would certainly be in the same boat, right, across our estate. If the heat's there, we will plug into it. I think there's another question, and maybe back to Aoife, right? And the question is, has any consideration been given to running a national procurement exercise, right, to procure district heating, so the public sector bodies can actually avail it, right? Because I think that would be a major unblocker, right, or a removal of a barrier to the public sector bodies actually availing of district heating systems.
Not that I know of, unless John knows, but district heating is not really our vibe in geological survey, I'm afraid. I wish it was. So I don't know of any, but John, maybe you know of something nationally. Sorry, I should say the committee you mentioned earlier, the working group is a national, it's not just for Dublin, right?
I mean, there's, I suppose, those sort of details are probably being worked out by groups like that at the minute. Like you see, different models, I guess, being adopted in different places. Like I look at Bristol every now and again. They've got this what's called their Bristol City project, where basically they're kind of just through a border around the city, and like we're going to decarbonise it, and we've got partners involved to do that. I suppose the kind of approach we're taking at the moment is, if there's not a district heating network, then you basically have to consider that you might connect to a district heating network in the future, so you have to be district heating enabled, and that's something that's underpinned in the city development plan that Dublin City Council developed as well. So any kind of new, kind of large developments will have to consider district heating first, and they might have maybe like a campus system if they're a large site or something like that initially. So we're kind of talking water-based systems with centralised heating plant room or energy centre on site, where whatever heat production equipment they have can be taken out in the future and easily replaced with a heat exchanger to connect to a network. So I guess that's kind of the model that's being used at the moment. But I suppose the availability of that information around where the heat networks are going to be and when is key for people to make any decisions. So I would see things like online maps showing networks that are in planning and what stage they're at and all that being kind of a key kind of awareness piece when it comes to this really.
I can just come in to that gentleman's question there in relation to the healthcare sector. From a district heating network, certainly from the Mater Hospital's perspective, it was there. It's from a technical perspective, it's quite easy to connect into it. We're quite lucky because we had an energy performance contract where we have an orbital loop across the campus. Our campus is about 6.2 hectares of the state. We have satellite plant rooms and we have a number of different boiler rooms. So that energy mix with a district heating system could actually kind of remove some of the risk in that when you're fully dependent on a renewable resource, you have to make sure that it's actually responsive to the needs for the hospital. And back to the points that we've made from healthcare, we have ICUs, we have theatres, we have HCUs, and each case has different complexities and has different temperatures required. And certainly the systems that we have and the systems we need in the future will have to be able to respond appropriately to meet that demand, and that can peak and trough over the course of the day. The district heating networks will certainly support that into the healthcare sector with a collective of different mixes of energy, and it's a massive start to decarbonise the sector. I don't go back to the past point that I had, but if the statistics are correct, there's 5.7 tonnes for a domestic house of carbon emissions. We have to decarbonise by 2030 for approximately 1,000 lives. So we need it now, and as soon as it's there, we'll plug into it.
repeat. Just a quick question. I noted on one of the case study slides there, on the Paris case study, it said that the lifespan of the borehole was 30 years. And I mean, in some of the case study examples, again, you were looking at maybe 100 or 200 boreholes. And I noted that on the Southampton scheme, it was from sometime in the 80s, so it must be reaching that territory. So I was just wondering, what's involved when the borehole reaches the end of its life? Can it be relined, or what's the process? And has that process been encountered on any of these case studies schemes before?
I might pass that to Sarah, actually. So those that I put up are just new ones starting, so they won't have encountered them. There have been case studies in the past where, when they were put in place, they thought it was a 30-year limit, and then because that's been maintained properly and renewed every year, they've actually gotten twice that. But Sarah, maybe you have some examples.
It's down to sort of scaling and or corrosion of the materials that were used in the installations of the steel casing. That if there are,
so it's down to that deterioration of the materials, but so they can be rehabilitated, or in some cases, like in the Paris Basin, they're often on the, they just decide it's better to drill a whole new hole. It's more economical. So in some cases they're on their second phase of boreholes, because they started back in the late 60s and 70s. In terms of the shallower stuff, I mean, now they're kind of saying, like, I know, Rick, you would model for 50 years, and you would expect the equipment, that standard, and the equipment would at least last 50 years, if not 100 years. So it's sort of like you just put it in the ground, and you don't have to maintain the actual installation part. The deeper stuff, it's because you're actually extracting groundwater and that deep saline brines that I mentioned earlier, and that is what causes the problems, but they can be dealt with.
I think there was a question. Do you have a question, Eve?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to echo John's point on district heating, and I suppose everyone being willing to tap into it when it's coming. That's brilliant to hear. Just to be aware, in terms of geothermal, that we'll be mandated by Europe to have a certain mix of either waste heat, renewable heat, or cogenerated heat. And when you look at the renewable part of it, that's biomass, solar thermal, or geothermal. And when you look at a hospital setting and needing that security of supply, and thinking of that renewable portion, which would be minimum 50%, and that's only going to grow. Geothermal is a clear opportunity there, and I suppose it could be that you might not necessarily have a geothermal solution on your estate or your campus, but if you're asking the questions, I suppose, of a district heating network that you know is going to be developed in the area, you might be a key anchor tenant to make sure that, I suppose, you have those opportunities being explored, because that's where the real opportunity will be.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to make, and reiterating the question from the HSE earlier is, putting this out front and centre. It's a question for you.
As Chief Exec, it's a question to everybody really. I suspect you all are a group of pathfinders on a journey at different stages, and no doubt a long way to still go. But I just wonder, already, is there anything you would do differently?
I might just kind of add to that, actually, just to kind of wrap up in the last few minutes. If we go through everybody, you can maybe answer two questions, but also what do you foresee as the main kind of either technical or non-technical challenges, things that that we need to, we mentioned earlier about trying to keep the policy and legislation at pace with the science. So what there do you think that we should be kind of the things you would do differently, and then the next thing that you foresee that maybe challenge that needs to be overcome positively?
I'm going to steal the answer I just heard in the audience there. Start earlier.
That was good.
Yeah, I think that's the, for like the man we've been through an EPC as well too. And at the start, look, it was scary. There's lots of challenges there. There's a lot of unknowns and all that there. And there's lots of justification saying, what, let's push it down another few years down the road and see what happens. So I'm glad we didn't. In hindsight now, we would have started it, a few years before that, and I suppose that's the learning we're taking into this part of the conversation now is what do we need to do now, you know, is there people we need to talk to, is there policies we need to develop, is there, you know, what is it that we need to do? And yeah, there's, you know, there's some hard conversations, there's some challenges there, there's lots of hard work, there's no doubt about it, but I think, you know, we've demonstrated with, you know, everybody here that, you know, we're more than happy to roll up our sleeves and get stuck into it. And then I think that's, in terms of the challenges, those are the challenges. Technically speaking, my hospital is ready to plug into these systems, you know. Everything downstream stays the same, the heat exchangers are already in the plant room, the pipe work is in the ground. I just need a source to supply the heat into it. And you know, put the boilers to one side or have them there as an emergency case only, but we're ready to go. So I think it's just the policy stuff, it's the risks, it's the, you know, the first movers and all of that that we need to overcome. Those are the immediate challenges we need to address, and let's get it done.
Great.
I suppose in terms of what we do differently, we're still very early stages in our project, so I suppose on that one, as with everybody said, you know, start earlier and kind of explore all of this sooner. In terms of some of the challenges, some of the things that we've encountered, and we've chatted about this in terms of the sharing of information and the availability of information and the, I suppose, is de-risking in terms of taking away the myth about, you know, the problems and a lot of heavy in terms of geothermal. So I suppose that was one of the challenges that we had in terms of that information. And I suppose for us also want to push it further instead of going shallow, could we go deeper? But in lack of information and around that, then that makes that much more difficult. And at this stage, not able to explore. But should that data be available, or was it available, then that could have been a very different story.
Yeah, I think so. And that lack of information is kind of limiting our choices in terms of what we can do with this technology. Mark?
I think you said at the start, policy needs to get done quicker, and 2024, trying to see those dates, you see another year gone. It's something there that can give people a certain amount of comfort on policy would be brilliant. We do need to do this, as everyone was saying, we need to do this with our sizing, with our subsurface stuff. Doing differently, I think we would have started all 3 campuses at the same time, rather than starting with one. So we're struggling with one and we want to jump onto the next 2. That's the only thing I'd say. We should have just jumped into 3. But other than that, to be honest, it's policy and de-risking subsurface we need really, really urgently. I think everyone along here is the same boat. If it was available tomorrow, we'd all be starting tomorrow.
What we do differently? I suppose, maybe I should mention as well that we're actually currently developing a heat transition plan for Dublin. So there's about 85 actions in that that we've kind of highlighted as things we can do better. I suppose one kind of key one, I kind of see this as maybe the key to district heating in general. I'm going to take the district heating slant because we have enough geothermal experts. So I think the key thing is what we call demand risk. So it's the risk that you'll build something and then no customers will connect.
Yeah.
So I guess the way they're kind of tackling that in other countries is through zoning areas for district heating. And within those areas, certain building types are mandated to connect as kind of anchor loads. So it might be, large public sector buildings or new developments or whatever. And I guess that provides a bit of certainty in your business model that allows you to start to get pipes in the ground and start to get projects developed. And I suppose, gives your whole business model a bit more certainty and allows the kind of funding to come on stream and all that. So, I guess it's kind of a precursor maybe to the funding, and then maybe the funding itself is the other kind of key aspect. So, having plan money that allows this infrastructure to be developed and rolled out at the pace we need to do.
Right, thanks. Louise?
Question what should they do different? I think first is doing it earlier in the process. Like you look at the cost estimates before COVID and the Ukraine war, it was quite more compelling as a business case. Then after that, it was really difficult to convince because of the inflation crisis. And probably I would have been more ambitious on the business case, covering more buildings, going into the actual consumer input and looking at the whole system, including the building, different sources of heat that we can recover, CHP units. So that was a bit far away from the scope of the project. But it's been more ambitious. I mean, that's what really should have been done. And when you look at the rest of it of this kind, it was impossible in the time scale and the scope of the project. And probably what I would do would have been more challenging to the procurement system, so we could have used another type of procurement figures like that are more transparent and more and less kind of limiting. So there are models for big infrastructure that we can use that they bring more transparency and that they bring the client on side. So we're talking about open book estimates. When you talk about that to the procurements and when you talk about that to the contractors in the region, they just shake. That's it. Because your open book estimate, you're making their cost model transparent to them, to us, to the client. So it's a no-no for them. But that's how you really deliver big infrastructures. Like I've done that in the past, for desalination plants, for oil and gas, desalination plants, municipal sewage systems and plants, or industrial plants that need to be designed, constructed, and operated by the same awarded cluster or engineering or a mix of engineering consultancy and the construction companies in a construction. If you look at the bigger projects and like district heating schemes and things like that, you need this kind of contracts. It provides more security and it provides more anchors for risk allocation for all the parties.
And Stuart, finally.
Just two things, Pete, I think into that. If I had a flux capacitor and a time machine, I'd take the climate action plan 23 and bring it back to 1985. I think we do a hell of a lot of things differently. But on a more serious note, I think if you flip the question on its side, will we be here in 12 months' time asking the same question? And will we be saying, what would we have done different next year? And the question is, we have an opportunity here now with the legislation and with the climate action plan that's there to make these decisions. We have a campus expansion projected over the next couple of years and into next year, where we have to consider these technologies, all of them. And we have fun, and we need to make sure that the consultancies and the design teams are peppered with what's right for healthcare and how we get that information to the table as quickly as possible. We'll be through feasibility studies, taking a look at geothermal, taking a look at renewables, and getting to the conclusion as quickly as possible.
Very nice. I think, in summary, we all want more of it and bigger and quicker. But I think, just picking up from some of the comments there, I mean, what we're looking at here is the kind of challenges or things that we would have done differently or that we are facing into now. We're looking at policy, the risks, knowledge sharing, more geological information, zoning and planning for district heating, funding, knowledge sharing, project management. None of these things should be difficult to do, put it that way. And our European colleagues are already doing all of these things. We know how to do them. It's a case of joining those dots now and really kind of keeping the momentum that we have, pushing forward. So I think on that positive note, we might wrap up.